Hi friends, welcome back to day 4 of our annual workshop. Today we're going to be doing this super cute thread bobbin in this box here, and I'm super excited for this one because we're going to be using the padded satin stitch again like we did yesterday for this lovely yellow flower, but we're also going to be using a bit of a turkey stitch to create this kind of extra bit of thread that's kind of coming off of the bobbin. So this is going to be super fun. It is going to be a bit finicky. I think it's probably the best way to describe it because it's quite small. We're working with a very small element here, so there are going to be parts of this that might be a little bit fiddly, but it's going to be awesome when it's done. I'm super excited to see it. We are also going to be using beads today, which is again super fun because it's just another technique that we use in Bloom to just add some extra little details to our embroidery. They're not mandatory, you can use anything you like here. You can just do a regular embroidery stitch outline if you want to. But I've got these kind of very pale pink, creamy kind of coloured beads. They're very similar in colour to the DMC 3774, which is the light pink that we're using in this pattern. They're a very, very similar colour, so that's why I'm choosing these, so that it kind of ties in with the colour scheme. You can use any colour beads you like. You can use sequins if you want to. We have a tutorial in the membership of how to stitch sequins for lettering and in a line and stuff, so that tutorial will be helpful if you'd rather use sequins, or as I said, you can just use regular embroidery thread if you want to as well. So we're going to do the bobbin first and then we're going to do the beads afterwards, just so that we've got a bit of free air to work with to make the bobbin, and then we're going to add the border afterwards. So to do so, we're going to be doing, as I said, a padded satin stitch for the thread on the bobbin. We're just going to be outlining the bobbin with just regular black thread. So I'm using one strand of DMC 310, which is just the regular jet black thread. And I'm going to go ahead and thread my needle with that one strand. And to be honest, this is the part where I'm talking about where it could actually be quite fiddly and quite tricky, because we're going to be stitching the back stitch along some pretty small curves around the curved parts of this bobbin, and hopefully in this circle as well. So it's going to be some really, really teeny tiny stitches for this, but it will look worth it in the end. It will be totally worth the effort. So I'm going to get stuck straight in. The part we're stitching here is just this kind of top section here, the circle, and then the bottom section of the bobbin as well. We don't need to do any of the part in the middle because that's where we're going to be adding the padded satin stitch in a moment. So I'm going to go ahead and get started down here. So I'm going to bring the needle up basically where we're going to meet the thread of that plastic bobbin, and we're going to need to do some super duper tiny stitches to get this really lovely curve of the bobbin. And I really do mean tiny. It's going to be quite hard to kind of show how tiny on the camera, but if you can see my first stitch there, then you can see just how tiny these stitches are being. And here, stitch placement really is the key. It's just about being very, very intentional with where you're putting your needle up and down on the fabric to make sure that you are following the line cohesively and you're following the curve that you need to. It might take 110% concentration just to do these tiny stitches, but as I said, I do think it's going to be totally worth it when we see the end result. I do have a whole tutorial on teeny tiny lettering, which is inside the membership, which, granted, this isn't lettering, but the whole premise of that tutorial is essentially to show you how I would stitch like the curves of lettering, and we're following a very similar approach. It's just about doing these really small stitches to kind of really show the curves of cursive lettering. So if you're struggling with knowing kind of where your placement should be and where you should put the needle down, etc., or how long your stitch length should be, that could be a really helpful tutorial for you as well. So at the bottom of a bobbin, and in fact I've got a real bobbin to show you, haven't I? We have these slits at the bottom of the bobbin where we can tuck our thread into. So that's what I'm stitching next. I've just done a slightly longer kind of straight stitch there, and then I'm going to meet that with another straight stitch here. and that's going to create that little notch in the bottom of the bobbin. And now this part is straight, so we don't need to worry too much about super teeny tiny stitches. Whenever you're stitching like a straight line or something, you don't have to do the super small stitches. You can create the second notch. It's about taking your time as well. You know, you probably won't get the needle exactly where you want it to be on the first attempt. It doesn't matter. You can just keep bringing the needle in and out of the fabric until it's exactly where you need it to be. You don't get any points for doing this quickly. And honestly, just taking that extra bit of time can kind of make or break it, I think, at the end, and kind of just make it look either better or worse. So you guys probably know that about me by now. At this point, I always advocate for taking your time and going slowly and enjoying the process. So I'm back to those super teeny tiny stitches now. Curve of the bobbin. Pulling my thread out of my needle. So I'm okay with that there. That is now the bottom of our bobbin all stitched. And now we're going to repeat the exact same at the top up here. I'm going to bring my needle up where the plastic would kind of meet the thread. And I'm going to go ahead and repeat the same up here. So again, I'm going to be using super teeny tiny stitches for this as well. And then now that we're on that kind of straighter edge, I can make those stitches a bit longer. So there's the top of the bobbin completed. The final step is just the circle. So again, this is going to be quite tricky because it's a very, very small circle. So we just want to be keeping stitches super duper short. And honestly, don't worry if it's not a perfect circle. It really doesn't matter too much. And if you want to just skip the circle entirely, then you're welcome to do that. You know, it's not gonna be the end of the world if it's not there. You're probably gathering from a lot of my patterns and the way that I design. I'm not a super realistic embroiderer. I don't do realistic portraits or landscapes or anything like that. I kind of put an artistic kind of impression on it. So if the bobbin doesn't look like a real bobbin, it really doesn't matter. If there's no circle at the top, it really doesn't matter. So if you really don't want to do this circle, then don't feel obligated. It's really okay. So for that final stitch, I'm bringing the needle up where I started, so that we have that continuous circle. So it's a bit more of an oval than a circle, but I'm happy with it. It's done the job I needed it to do. So I'm going to go ahead and tie that thread off there because that is the outline all stitched. And the next step is the fun part, and that's going to be the adding the thread to this lovely bobbin that we're stitching. So this one I have decided to use one of my favourite pinks, which is DMC 223. I love this pink. It's kind of a bit bolder and brighter without being too in your face. Again, you know me by now, I like my muted soft colours. So that's the colour I'm choosing, but you can choose any colour that you like here. You're not tied to the colour palette at all. And we're going to be using all 6 strands of thread for this one because we want the appearance of this bobbin being completely filled up and wound up with a whole skein of thread on it. Obviously we're not going to use a whole skein, but that's the kind of appearance we want to give this. So the first thing that we're going to be doing here, rather than the thread around the skein, is actually the little tassel of thread that's coming off of it. Again, if I show you the real, the real bobbin that we're trying to recreate here, whenever you kind of tuck your thread in, we always have that kind of loose bit of thread. If I turn it over, it's easier to see. We always have that kind of loose bit of thread where we've cut it. And that's basically what we're going to be recreating, is this kind of little tail of thread that's sitting at the bottom of the bobbin. So for that, we're going to be using the turkey stitch. So for that, we're going to be using the tassel stitch, but the tassel stitch is actually made up of the turkey stitch. So all we're going to be doing for that is bringing our needle up where that kind of strand of thread meets the bobbin. And then put our needle down just next to it, pretty much in the same place. Pull the thread through, but we want to be leaving a loop. Now we want this loop to be the length of the strand that we've drawn on the pattern, which is here. I always like to leave mine a little bit longer so that I can then trim them to the right size afterwards. So I'm going to leave my loop about this kind of big. I could pull it a bit smaller, but again, I like the option of being able to trim the turkey stitch as much as I need to. So we've got our loop left on the fabric. I'm now going to put my finger on that loop just to make sure that I don't accidentally pull it through. I want that loop to stay. And I'm now going to bring my needle up, again, just next to where those stitches were. Pull that thread all the way through. And this is why I'm holding on to the loop, so that I don't pull that thread through as I tug on this one. And then I'm going to stitch over the top of those two. So just so that you can see this properly, I'm basically doing a very small straight stitch that's going to sit just over the top of the stitch I did where the loop is. And that is going to secure that loop in place. Again, I'm just going to hold on to that initial loop to make sure that doesn't pull through any more than I want it to. And that right there has now secured that loop because we've put that stitch over the top of the stitch of the loop. So now if I give that a tug, it's not going to come away. Like it's very nicely secured now by this small straight stitch that we've added over the top of it. So that is basically the turkey stitch. That's what a turkey stitch comes down to. We now need to trim this to create that really lovely tail of thread. So I'm going to grab my embroidery scissors. And again, I'm going to keep it a bit longer to start with, just so that I can decide on the length that I want of this tassel. Next, I'm going to get a needle. You can use the same needle you've just used or a spare one if you've got one to hand. And with the eye of the needle, I'm just going to kind of brush through that to separate out all of those individual strands. So that is still a bit longer than I wanted, so I am just going to trim a bit more of that off. If you have a piece of tape, like sellotape or washi tape or something, that can be handy to kind of pick up the fray ends of the thread if they're sticking to your fabric. once you've trimmed it to the length that you're happy with, that is how we do the tassel stitch, and it really is as simple as that. And I think that's going to be, it might look a bit silly now because we don't have anything else on the bobbin yet, but once we've done the rest of the bobbin, this is going to look really cool. So I've still got my 6 strands of thread secured here from where we just secured that tassel, and we're now going to move straight into the padded satin stitch to add the coloured thread to the middle of this bobbin. So for this I'm going to once again be doing bullion knots because I want this to have a lot of texture, a lot of raised 3D nature about this. So I'm going to go ahead and do some bullion knots here. So I'm going to do these horizontally because I'm going to be adding the satin stitch in this, vertically, because I'm going to be doing the satin stitch horizontally. Because when you think of how a thread is actually wound on the bobbin, so if we're looking at it at this angle, we wind it horizontally. So I'm going to add vertical bullion knots that go in this direction here so that it's easier to stitch over them. So I'm going to start by bringing my needle up just like we did yesterday. I'm just inside of the edge of where I'm going to be doing the satin stitch. I'm going to bring the needle down in a similar place down at the bottom, leave a nice big loop of thread, bring the needle back up very near that first stitch, and then I'm going to wrap the thread around the needle. So that's 5 times. I think that's probably a good length for that. So I'm going to pinch the needle, push the needle through, so pull that the whole way through, and then put the needle down at the end once again to secure that bullion knot in place. And I'm just going to repeat that all the way along until this whole section is filled in. Again, just to give as much kind of that 3D dimension that I can here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And do the next one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to squeeze one more in there, I think. Being careful not to catch your tassel, so I'm just going to pull those ends of the tassel back through quickly so they don't get caught. So there are our 6 bullion knots. You may have got more or less in there than me, it doesn't really matter. All we wanted to do was basically fill that space as much as possible so that we can now have a really lovely raised padded satin stitch. So without further ado, let's continue with that padded satin stitch. So as I said before, we're going to be doing horizontal stitches now that are going to sit over the top of all of those bullion knots that we've just stitched. So I'm going to start off in the centre and go over the top of all of those. Again, we are going to need to be careful with the tassel. The reason we did that first is just so that we could cover the pinning stitch of the turkey stitch. If we did it last, then that pinning stitch would be very visible. So that's why we did that one first. It is slightly annoying because it does get in the way a little bit, but once again, it's going to be totally worth it. Now with this satin stitch, we don't need to worry too much about it being a perfect square. So you'll see that from the pattern that the edges of these are kind of wobbly. And that's because when you look at a real bobbin, the way that the thread is kind of wound around it, it is a bit lumpy and bumpy. It's not a perfect square, it's very lumpy. So it's totally okay for your satin stitch to be completely imperfect here. In fact, it's encouraged because that's what's going to help it look more like thread round a bobbin. The same kind of goes for how flat and neat the satin stitch sits. You know, it doesn't need to be perfectly smooth for this because I think then it's going to look more like real thread on a bobbin if it's not. So I'm just adding in some satin stitches there, making sure I go all the way up to the edge of where we did the outline with the back stitch. Might be quite handy to have a spare needle with you if you have one, just to pull through any bits of that tassel that escape. You can also, if you've got like washi tape or masking tape, you could tape this down so that it doesn't keep catching as well. Running very low on thread here. Once again, story of my life. So that is our thread bobbin, all lovely and filled in, and I think that just looks super cute. I am running extremely low on thread, but one thing you can also do is kind of do some completely wild, almost like completely random straight stitches over the top. So I'm starting quite low and I'm coming up quite high. And that is going to kind of have that appearance of it sitting like it's been wrapped around the bobbin multiple times, not in any particular order. I mean, I'm quite particular with how I wind mine. I don't really wrap them over very much. You'll see that mine are quite straight on the bobbin. They're very uniform wrapping of a bobbin, but also it's not unusual for a bobbin to kind of have some random stitches, random winds that kind of make it be a bit random and sporadic. So if you would like to do some kind of non-perfect satin stitches and straight stitches over the top, then I highly encourage you to do so. Oh, doesn't she look cute? Right, that is our bobbin all finished. I hope you love yours. I'm excited to see how yours have turned out in the community. Next up is the outline, and we're going to be using beads for this one, as I said earlier. So I've got these beads here. I got them from a local shop by me. I don't know how you pronounce it, I always struggle, but it's Sostren is how I say it. I don't know if that's correct. They have loads of little cute trinkets and little vases and all sorts of stuff in there. If you don't know the shop, then you're missing out. I'm just going to say that because these were only 92p, which is just insane. I love their beads and they're so cute. So I'm going to be using these. But as I said at the beginning, you can use any colour beads that you like, any type of beads that you want to. If you are unfamiliar with using beads in embroidery completely, then once again we have a technique tutorial all about them that shows you how to attach them to fabric and what kind of beads that you might want to look for. So we've got all of that inside Bloom already if you're curious to explore more. But for the most part, I will be showing you pretty much what you need to know today. So I'm going to be getting a piece of thread that is very similar to the colour of the beads. So as I said, I've chosen these beads because they are very similar to the colour of the light pink that I'm using. So I'm going to be using this thread to secure them to the fabric. So we only need one strand of thread for this. I'm going to go ahead and pull one strand of thread. We're also going to need a very tiny needle. So I recommend using a size 7 or a size 9 needle. But essentially the test that you're going to want to do is make sure that the whole needle, including the eye, can go through the centre of the bead. So to test that, once you've got your needle and your beads, just make sure that that bead can go all the way over the needle and over the eye as well. So I'm just going to thread my one strand onto my small needle, not the end. And then we can begin by stitching the outline. So I'm going to bring the needle up in the very corner. Doesn't matter which corner, you can start anywhere you like. And what we're going to be doing now is threading enough beads on our strand of thread to fill up this entire length of the box. And then we're just going to couch them down afterwards. It is as simple as that. So I'm going to go ahead and pop my beads here. And I'm just going to hook a bunch of these on. And this is why we need them to be able to go over the eye of the needle as well. And once we've got them on there, we're just going to slide them to the end. So I still need maybe 3 more beads on there. One thing I love about these beads as well is that they're actually not the same size, which I love. I love the fact that they're not uniform. So that last bead is quite a chunky one, and it's actually probably a bit too big for the space that I need. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove that final one and find a small one. Like that one there. Like so, that's the perfect length for that one. So then I'm going to go ahead and put the needle down in the bottom right corner to secure those where they are. But because this is quite a long line of beads, you'll see that they're very wobbly and they're not very secure. So all I'm going to do is some couching stitches just to make sure that they stay where they are. So every 5 or 6 beads or so, I'm going to bring my needle up on one side of this line here, and then I'm going to put it down on the other side. And you're not going to see that stitch at all because it's going to slot in between the beads and it's going to tie down the stitch kind of underneath the beads, so you won't see it. And do that again a little bit further up. And I'm going to pop it down on the other side. And And you'll see now that the top is now very wibbly wobbly, the bottom is much more secure. So that's basically the impact of what this is having. It's going to allow the beads to just sit exactly where they should. I'm going to do one more small stitch up here. Secure that down, like so. And there is our first line of beads, which is so cute. I love the fact that it just gives it just even more texture. We've got a lot of texture going on in this project so far, and I think this is just a really lovely addition to kind of making that happen. So now for the next line. So I'm going to bring my needle up on the next edge, on the next corner, sorry. I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to go ahead and hook a bunch of these on my needle until I have enough to fill the top length of our border. So one of these obviously has a smaller centre than the others because I cannot get that one over the eye of the needle. So I'm going to pop that bead to one side. A potential downside of the fact that these are not the same size, I suppose, is that turns out not all of them fit through the eye of the needle. So maybe need another 3 on there. Perfect, so now I'm going to pop my needle down here. And then we're going to do the same thing again, and we're just going to couch those down in place because they're very loose and wibbly wobbly if we don't do that. There we have our second line. And you can couch these down as much as you like. The more couching stitches you add, the more secure the beads are going to be. You know, if you don't mind them still having a bit of kind of slack in them, then you don't need to couch them quite as much. So now I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to bring my needle up in this corner. Once again, I'm going to hook a bunch of beads on. Another one there that doesn't want to fit over the end. Maybe 2 more little ones. Perfect. Now I can pop the needle down at the end of that line. And again, I'm now going to do some couching stitches just to secure those in place. And then the final one is this line at the bottom. And lastly, I'm going to couch those down in place. So if there are any parts where you feel like they are a bit too wobbly and you wish there was kind of a bit more holding it down, you can always go back and add in additional couching stitches wherever you need to, just to pin those in place. Like we're quite wobbly down at the bottom here, so I'm just going to go back and add in a few more couching stitches where they're required. But it doesn't need to be absolutely dead straight. I think it looks kind of cute that the beads aren't all the same size and maybe they're a bit wibbly wobbly and in the wrong kind of place, but I like that. I think it's what makes it handmade and unique. So that is a wrap on day 4. We've done lots today. We have done the turkey stitch tassel stitch, we've done padded satin, and now we've done lovely beads as well. I really hope you've enjoyed it today and have learned lots of new things and really had a chance to kind of practice some more of the advanced stitches that we have here inside of Bloom. Tomorrow, tune in for day 5. We're going to be doing this lovely skein of embroidery thread over here, and it's going to be very similar to what we've done today. So I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Happy stitching!